I'm joined here by Chris Elston. He's the activist who's commonly known as Billboard Chris, who travels the world trying to raise awareness of gender identity ideology. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, you're not in the UK very often. We've spoken on this show before, so I'm very grateful for you coming back to talk about what it is you do. What is it that you do?
I have conversations, and I aim to start conversations in order to raise awareness about what I consider to be the greatest child abuse scandal in modern medicine history, the business of trying to change the sex of children.
And you stand there, wherever people gather, in a billboard which says children cannot consent to puberty blockers.
That's right.
And people react in all sorts of ways. I mean, I've seen clips of you being physically attacked, even. You obviously have a lot of courage if you're going to put yourself in that situation.
Well, kids are being cut up and sterilized and turned into lifelong medical patients. So if I have to take the odd broken bone or bruise here and there, that's not a big deal.
What is the worst experience you've had?
Broken arm.
Broken arm?
Yeah, Antifa in Montreal a couple years ago, swinging a large traffic cone at my face, which I blocked 4 times with my forearm, but broke that bone.
But broke the arm.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you're obviously here this week in London. Yesterday you were at the Palestine March, the Palestine rally. Lots of people there. And you were asked to move away by a police officer after a female protester started jabbing you in the face with a Palestine flag. Was that right?
Yeah, there was a young woman who took issue with me just being there because I guess they think that there's only one issue in the world. And so she kind of caused a ruckus, and then this other woman came at me and kind of jabbed her flag stick in my face. Which
is obviously invading your personal boundaries. Let's have a look. I think we've got a clip of that. Let's have a look.
Why are you here? Why are you here?
I'm here to have conversations.
Why are you being offensive?
Hi.
Years ago?
Do you want to move over there? Yeah.
I'm moving you over there to prevent a breach of the peace.
If I stand peacefully and people come and get aggressive with me, I'm the one breaching the peace?
If your presence at that location is causing people to do that, then yes, okay?
Now, I find that very disturbing, Chris, because what he's effectively saying is if the mob is big enough and intimidating enough and scary enough, then they're going to blame the person who's upset them for a breach of the peace. But surely those who are responsible for violent actions are the people committing the violence.
That's what I think. This has happened to me several times, especially in Canada. But, you know, he literally said, and he came back to me later as well, and he said it was easier to move you than it is to take care of these people.
Well, that's probably true.
It is, but you know what he could do as a first action is he could just talk to those 3 people and say, leave them alone.
Yes.
That should be the first course of action. And if you use a little authority as a police officer, I've dealt with police hundreds of times, it usually works.
Yes.
But as a default, we shouldn't just be removing the peaceful people to appease the violent people. That just encourages more violence.
And it sets a very bad precedent, doesn't it? But, I mean, that, to me, it's completely unforgivable, really. But then, at the same time, you were there. There's a lot of people there. Did it feel like this could kick off, that it could get very violent, that the police may not be able to control it?
Well, almost all of these Muslim protesters support my message. Literally 100% of them, probably, if we had a conversation about this, because they're virtually all against child transition as well.
Right.
But a lot of them just think that, you know, I shouldn't be there talking about a separate issue.
Right, I see.
My whole thing is I go to wherever the people are because I aim to start a lot of conversations, and there are thousands of people taking my pictures during the day. That starts all sorts of conversations I'll never know about. But there is more than one issue in the world. That's Trafalgar Square, where a lot of these protests go on. And
well,
I upset people.
I mean, people are talking about that. That clip has gone viral.
Yep.
But, you know, people think that you're a provocateur, that you're needlessly provocative, that you're just causing trouble. Do you think they have a point?
No, it's just these incidents like this are the ones that get seen by most people, but 99% of the time I'm just out there having normal, beautiful conversations with people. But I'm not going to shy away from these events where there are a lot of people, because it is important that we have these conversations, because kids are being harmed for life, and we need to be able to talk about it. So sometimes I'll go to some of these transgender rallies or whatever, because you have these people out there celebrating what is child abuse. And I think someone has to be brave enough to offer the counter-narrative, which is the truth, that children cannot consent to any of this life-altering...
And you've been there at sort of trans activist rallies as well. And, I mean, that must be particularly dangerous because you can guarantee 100% of the people there will be against what you say.
Yeah, March 31st of this year, I was assaulted by a man who identifies as a woman. They were screaming in both of my ears as I was giving an interview to a journalist. There were about 36 police there. And I got throat punched in the face, pushed from behind, pulled by another guy simultaneously as the investigating officer, a young woman, was smiling throughout the assault.
Did the police not do anything to protect you?
Nothing. They didn't charge the person. They didn't discipline the officer. It's truly surreal because there couldn't be a more clear-cut case of assault and they do nothing about it.
You made a very interesting point about the pro-Palestine march, is that the majority of people there would actually support your cause, but you do have these interesting conflations of Antifa or left-wing, normally middle-class white activists turning up who are all very pro-LGBTQIA+,
right.
aligning themselves with people who fundamentally disagree. We've actually got a clip of what happened when this clash occurred. Let's have a look.
This guy is trying to propagate anti-LGBTQ propaganda. He's trying to tell children that they are not allowed to be trans.
Yeah, they're not. Yeah, they're not. Man, bro. No. Black nail polish on is a man, bro. Stop talking. Stop talking. There is some religions you can't do that. Yeah, you have to respect that decision. But in religions, yeah.
Now, a lot of people found that hilarious because, you know, that guy, and he had sort of fingernail paint on as well, and I think they started mocking him for that. Did he just genuinely expect that the Muslim protesters at that rally would be all about the LGBTQIA+ group?
Yeah, it seems like he did. So I was just walking down the street and he swore at me and called me a fascist. So I stopped and I pulled out my phone and I started to have a conversation with him. I'll upload my conversation later, I haven't had time. But this is what I do. I just talk to people and I was trying to ask him some questions and then they came along and took care of the job for me and he ran away.
I mean, it is funny, but I kind of think it's so naive. I almost feel sorry for him in a weird way, you know?
Yeah, and I think he's either from Canada or America as well. So
he just didn't get it.
This is like the typical Antifa activist that I deal with all the time.
I mean, that's incredible. When someone calls you a fascist, your instinct is to pull out your phone and film it. My instinct is to run a mile, right? Who's right here?
Well, I'm not going to judge you, but I think it's important that we have these conversations, and I'm not there. Obviously, he's not ready to receive true information, so I just ask questions to get them thinking. You know, what is a transgender child? And they can never tell me.
But that's the point. You see, I don't think when someone's screaming fascist, in my mind, I'm thinking that is not someone who's capable of rational thought, rational discussion. That's an extremist. That's someone who really needs to be de-radicalized rather than persuaded, right?
Right.
So
but when
you
I
take a different approach.
Yeah, when I capture these conversations, it's helping to educate other people. It's helping
the people watching.
That's right.
Yeah.
So there's two facets to what I do. There's the conversation in the moment on the street, and most of the time I'm just having nice conversations, helping to educate people. But I record them, I post them online, and those today are getting seen by 1 million or 2 million people. So it's helping to educate them how to deal with these conversations. It's helping to teach them about this, because ultimately the only way we stop this child abuse is through educating the populace about what's going on, and ultimately it's going to be parents who put a stop to this. And we've had fantastic success, especially in America the last 12 months. 20 states have passed legislation to stop this.
That's a really interesting idea, because I went on a TV show once. It's called The Big Questions, and I knew I was going to be the person with the unfashionable view, and I knew everyone was going to shout at me. And a commentator called Melanie Phillips gave me some advice, and she said, don't even think about what's going on in the room. Think about all the thousands of people watching at home. And that really helped, because all of a sudden I realised the more they shout at me, the more my point will be proved. Yeah. And that's really what you do in a nutshell, insofar as you're taking all this abuse, sometimes violence, but you're thinking of all the people when these clips go viral and how that will appear. And to be honest, those activists don't come out well.
That's right. I always tell people who come out on the street with me, I want you to imagine that 1 million people are watching us and behave accordingly. And because that's what ends up happening. And with these moments, I mean, that video's been seen probably 20 million times.
Wow.
So he's doing my job for me, and I want to thank him very much.
But it is unbelievable, and I really do credit you with the courage of doing it, because a lot of people wouldn't do it. But you must, at some point, think to yourself, do you know what? I shouldn't keep doing this. It's just too much.
No, I never think that, to be honest with you. No. I don't get worried by these people at all anymore. At the beginning, it was a bit different.
Yeah.
But honestly, in that moment, I think it's kind of funny. I'm not worried about what they say to me or with them yelling at me or anything. And it's interesting, I was talking with Jordan Peterson's wife the other day, we did a podcast, and I took his personality test, and I was in the 2nd percentile for neuroticism, which basically means that none of this stuff bothers me, so I guess I'm just kind of wired for this.
And what do you see happening in the future? You're going to keep on campaigning. I think things are changing. I think people are becoming more aware.
Yeah.
So do you have hope that eventually, at the very least, our major institutions, our NHS, our government will stop pushing this stuff and wake up to the problem?
Yes, I've never had any doubt in my mind from day one that we're going to put a stop to this. It's simply a matter of how many children are harmed before we do. The NHS conducted a systematic review of all the evidence and found that none of this was helping these children psychologically, so they've basically put a stop to it. Sweden, Finland, same thing has happened. Denmark and Norway are putting a stop to it. Finally, the American Academy of Pediatrics in the US is conducting a systematic review, and it's because so many parents have learned what's going on. And all sorts of other people are starting to wear their hats. We now have a law firm in Texas solely dedicated to suing for these detransitioners. 4 men, 4 dads with 17 kids between them left their law firms because they felt a calling to fight for these kids. So they have all sorts of lawsuits flying now, and that's one great way to put a stop to this.
Chris Elston, thank you so much for joining me.